Welcome to Kubernetes SIG Apps for Monday, July 15th, 2019. And we've got an agenda. I will go ahead and paste it into chat for everyone to see. And today we have a few topics. The first one is the long-term fix for spurious rollouts due to mutating admission controllers. And I see Thomas's name next to this. Did I get that right? Are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, the floor is yours.
Okay, so we have talked about this some time ago, and we haven't really decided on what to do with it. Jana had a good talk about it, which I think is linked in the agenda, hopefully. But basically, we have several workloads controllers that compare its template to a pod spec, which means that when an admission controller, admission webhook actually modifies the pod template, or basically any object, there can be a replica set in between that has the same issue. But usually it's with pod template. And if that pod template is modified by the admission webhook, well, the controller doesn't see it and thinks it hasn't already created the new pod according to the pod spec because they don't match, and it goes into a hot loop usually. I think that was the issue for at least deployments. I recall daemon set as well. We added some backup there. I'm not sure about stateful sets, but probably this is pretty spread across the code base. So I was hoping we can talk about the options layout in that doc and what we can do in the future to avoid that. Hopefully, I haven't checked the attendance, but hopefully is there Ken? Yeah, Ken and Janet. So I would like to ask your input on this and what we can do. I'm personally based to use a revision-based mechanism and don't compare pod spec anymore. But, well, what are your thoughts on this? I can go into detail on the revision-based approach. Yeah.
Ken and Janet, do you have any comments here?
Can you hear us now?
We can hear you now.
I can hear now.
Okay. Yeah, we were trying really hard to comment. It just, the technology wasn't working for us. So, I mean, we think that, like, for stateful set and daemon set, because it uses the revision-based mechanism, we're somewhat out of the loop, but the semantics there are kind of like, at the end of the day, whatever is the output of every controller that touches it after stateful set creates the pod, that's the output that stateful set is looking for. And the behavior you get is that if there are certain labels for stateful set or daemon set that if you remove them from the pod, it's going to destroy and recreate the pod because it doesn't know that that pod matches the current revision of the daemon set or stateful set. The difference with deployment is the intermediary object, which is the replica set, which is sort of like a controller revision for daemon set or for deployment, except that the replica set controller actually works on it. So, I mean, I think we looked at, well, everyone should look at the stuff that Janet already collected after having some conversations with API machinery about options. Where we landed originally was that we shouldn't, basically users shouldn't use mutating webhooks to do injection to stateful sets, daemon sets, or replica sets or deployments. If you're going to use a mutating webhook to do something like inject a sidecar or add a pod security context, you should act on the pod itself as opposed to acting on the intermediary object, which stops things from going crazy. If we have a better mechanism, no sense in not doing it though. Like if we can add another layer of protection to ensure robustness, that'd be great, because we do still see people, like I've seen people do it with stateful set in such a way that it breaks, but I don't know if that's still a problem. I haven't seen that in at least 3 or 4 releases. We've seen people do it with replica set in such a way that it wedges. Janet, do you know the last time we saw that actually happen in the wild?
Last time I've never seen it happening for anything other than deployment.
Okay.
So I think the big difference is that deployment compare its spec with replica set spec,
yeah.
But daemon set and stateful set doesn't compare its spec with. I mean, no one is mutating controller revisions, and
right.
That's why we didn't see it.
Basically,
there.
yeah.
And so we try to tell people not to mutate the spec of the template, the template of intermediate objects like replica set, but there is already an implementation in the API server that removes alpha fields.
That's where we got in the daemon set or the deployment trouble in the first place, because there was a mismatch between and we had to.
And they're adding more code that does that today.
Okay.
So we're kind of.
I mean, Thomas, do you want to describe what you're proposing?
Okay. I just wanted to add, like, I've seen it like 2 months ago on replica set, and I think it was because of some defaulting field or something, and it went totally crazy. So.
Yeah, but there was one I know that Morton removed. I think Morton, you were the one who helped back that one out originally, right? That was the change where they basically added defaulting between 2 versions that made things go crazy on upgrade, and that was definitely for deployment and replica set.
Yeah, the downgrade fails.
Downgrade, okay. So, I mean, we know it's a problem. It's not like a high severity in terms of the number of clusters that are affected as far as we can tell. But if we can come up with something better than what we've got now, that would be great.
Okay, so I think this is also partially how we do it for deployment configs in OpenShift. So, but this isn't related to it. So the thing how you can do this actually, like, is not to compare the pod spec at all, because that's the cause of the issue. So you make an admission that checks the generation. If that changes, it checks the old pod spec and the new pod spec, and if that changes, it bumps a field, which you can call revision, and you bump that field in admission on every pod spec change in the deployment. Well, when the controller sees this bump, it will roll out a new replica set with this labeled with this number, and that's basically it. You actually need to keep 2 of those numbers for cases of a rollback, but that depends how you choose to implement that. But the idea is to have an admission that compares the pod spec for you and bumps some counter if that changes, and controller acts on that. The only side effect is you can't really reconcile if someone messes with the replica set template, but it's probably, you can do immutable replica sets, I guess, to fix it.
So that was one thing that we considered. Like, I think you can actually fix it just making replica sets immutable.
No, that's not the case. Admission config actually changes the thing before it's created. So immutability doesn't apply there. I think that
right. So you have to make sure that it conforms with it, and then make sure that it's immutable after the fact as well.
But I'm not sure I'm getting you, because the admission, you think the pod spec is something, admission changes it, and then it is created. So you will always be a mismatch.
Right. No, so step one would be kind of, so there's that problem, right? But there's webhooks can be triggered not just on create, webhooks can be triggered on update as well, right?
Sure.
So
that's easier to solve, I guess.
Yeah, so so a prerequisite, what you're saying is a prerequisite for what you're proposing is also making replica sets immutable, which was one of the things that we considered. Another way to do this with immutable replica sets is if you had something like a dry run where you could see what the server is going to create, the controller itself could actually figure out that, okay, well, this is what the result is going to be, and then if it can't be mutated after the fact, we think that might be safe too. But I think that approach was enumerated in Janet's doc, and there were a couple of problems there. I think dealing with the immutable replica sets would be doable, but one of the challenges there is that now we have to add that logic to deployment controller, which probably isn't the end of the world. We didn't think the dry run thing would actually work. I forget why that was, but that's also in the document. Do you remember offhand?
One of the reasons is that if your mutating webhook is doing something like adding a timestamp, that the dry run result might be
different every time.
Yeah.
The dry run's not idempotent was the end result of that one. So, I mean, it sounds like what you're proposing is the best thing we've got going.
Yeah, I couldn't really think about anything more reliable than doing revision. And also dry run won't be cheap at all. Like you actually have to call the API server live, and then it's not idempotent. So yeah.
It's not idempotent, and you're right, it's super expensive. You have to call on every deployment update. Deployments tend to be the most prevalently deployed workload controller, period. And the performance implications there might be not fun.
Can you describe again how does the rollback work or the revision approach?
Okay, so for rollback, you actually need to keep two of those numbers. You need to keep one revision for that's monotonically increasing for every pod spec change, and then you keep a second one that actually tells you which one is deployed. Actually, it depends on if you do rollback by actually using the old replica set or taking the old replica set template and creating a new replica set from it. And I actually forgot which one we do in OpenShift and which one we do upstream, because I think we were differing on that. Do we always create a new replica set on rollback in upstream, or that was us?
No, we adopted an existing replica set if possible on rollback, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're using the old one.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, you just need a second pointer telling you which one is active and the other one acting as a counter on pod spec changes.
I mean, it sounds fairly consistent with what we're doing in deployment, or I'm sorry, in daemon set and staple set. Do you think you'd want to like put it in a cap so we can take a look at it and like work it through at a deeper level to try to like figure out exactly what we want to implement?
Okay, yeah, I could put it into a cap. I was wondering if someone has other ideas before we start going that path. Yeah.
I mean, if anyone does, now would be a good time to put them in. Like all the stuff that we thought of from between myself, Janet, Daniel from API Machinery. I don't remember, did we involve David Eves in the conversation?
We involved Jordan and
Daniel. Yeah, okay. So we had a couple of people think about it, and the stuff that's in the doc is basically the conclusions we came to previously. But opening the conversation back up, I think what you're proposing sounds more reasonable than, at least more thought through, and actually it sounds like there's an implementation in OpenShift that uses something like it for deployment config anyway. I would say like open the cap up. I mean, unless anybody else has better ideas, because surely we do not at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. I also wondered about if we can just do it in V1, because like this, none of those things we use internally for the rollouts are codified in the API. I hope nobody's directly relying on how we behave internally now. Are there opinions about that as well? Or is it fine to change how we treat it internally?
Well, what you're talking about doing is making replica sets immutable, for one. And there are ways we can do that to make it an opt-in feature that preserves backward compatibility, right? Like when you could say like there is an annotation that's generated that makes it immutable, that would be fine. And then you could turn that off if you wanted to, right? So that's one side of it. Now, in terms of adding the pointers, we imagine storing those in the status, right?
Yeah, those will be in status.
So if they're in status and we're talking about adding fields, not removing them, according to the laws of API convention, I think we're okay. So I think this is something that can be done in a V1 API without breaking backward compatibility, but we should get API review on it for sure. The other thing I would say is that when we roll it, we can always gate it with an alpha feature gate, and we can have it the feature turned off by default when we initially release it, and do a slow progression for rollout. It doesn't necessarily have to be all in one foul swoop.
Yeah, like certainly, like purely API wise, this won't be breaking any compatibility. Like from the expectation side, from those who were used to how we behaved internally, like the deployment controller, there will be changes. Right. But we have never really put any guarantees around it. So
I mean, well, that's what I was going to say. In terms of the API and the guarantees we do have around the behavior of deployment, I don't see this as a breaking modification. But I mean, I think we should probably put it down on paper and take a look at specifically what's being proposed just to make ourselves convinced and sure. But I don't see, because I mean, rollback still functions. It still basically functions in the same way, right? Like there would be some additional labels on the status of deployment that would control the behavior of deployment controller with respect to how it, like the thing that would be breaking to users would be you can't wedge your deployment controller, which is like not feature, right? That's bug. So
okay. Yeah.
I mean, those are my thoughts. But I would say let's put it in a CAP, and then internally as a SIG go through it. We'll get an API reviewer to look over it and just make sure that we're being honest. And if we're really concerned about it, we can also put it up to SIG architecture and just mention it in a SIG architecture meeting and say, hey, does anybody have any concerns about this breaking backward compatibility? I don't imagine that they will, but asking won't hurt, and just socializing it with the rest of the community. And we can do that in KEP form before we actually start writing any of the code, so we don't waste time. But I don't anticipate it.
Yeah, sure. And I was actually wondering, if we really need to make this dependent on the replica set immutability, because right now at this point, you can't change replica set because the deployment controller will modify it back or roll out a new one. But it doesn't really affect how it behaves, right? Like you shouldn't go mutating replica set. If you do it now, well, you have modified it. We just
What if you have a mutating webhook that operates on update?
Which update? Like the deployment control? I thought we only create replica sets. Do we actually run update on it?
Well, but that would be the thing, right? We don't necessarily run patches, but if, let's say the user creates a mutating webhook that we can protect it without immutability, we can protect it on creation. If the user implements a mutating webhook that acts on update and does injection there, we wouldn't be fully addressing that issue.
But to actually trigger an update, you would have to modify the replica set which at the current implementation, it would cause a new rollout. In the new one, it wouldn't. But the thing is, like, I don't know what the correct behavior is actually. Like, should you or shouldn't you? That's
if we're doing
really implementation dependent.
If we're doing a rollout, right, we do update the replica set just to change the number of replicas on the replica set at a minimum in deployment, right?
All right, yeah.
So I think that when my concern would be is if we don't do the immutability and there's a mutating webhook that it acts on update and we update the deployment to change a number of replicas, we trigger that mutating webhook and we end up in the same wedge spot. So like it might just, if we don't do the immutability, it might push the concern from creation time, which is the one we see now, to update time, right? Like it might not work.
I think the difference is we don't get wedged, because if there is a mutating update webhook and you modify the replica set to set annotation or anything, and it modifies the pod spec, the only thing that happens is that it will change the pods, but no new rollout will happen in the new implementation of what I'm proposing. That's why I was thinking like.
Actually, so if you change the pod spec on the replica set, what would end up happening? Yeah, okay.
Basically, nothing happens. Like,
right. You might not get wedged because if you modified the pod. Okay, that makes sense.
So I was thinking to start without the immutability because, well, I guess it's easier to get consensus.
And it can be added later.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping we can get one day
not do it at all, but
immutability, and you just create it with that. I'm not sure if there is a moving proposal for that, but I recall it mentioned in some of our proposals before. Okay, so I think we are set, and I can write it down into a cap when I get some time to do it.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Any volunteers to review?
Sorry?
Okay.
Oh, well, you assign me, Janet, that's fine.
Yeah.
Were you asking for who to review?
Yeah. That's
me,
what I was
Janet.
Thinking. Yeah.
Sure. Janet and Janet.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, great, thank you. So the next topic we have is we're waiting on a review for the max unavailable for stateful steps proposal. That is enhancements poll 1010. I'll drop the link in here. The one thing that I know about this is an API change, so it needs an API review, and it looks like from a week ago, Clayton still had an outstanding comment.
Yeah, this is why I talked to Clayton. I think the main thing he wanted us to figure out was I think what I had mentioned in the cap was that max unavailable won't apply to PMP. So pod management policy as of today only applies to scale up and tear down of stateful sets. And he wanted us to take a look at that and see if it makes sense for PMP to also apply to max unavailable, because there is some overlap between what max unavailable and PMP does. So we should take our stand and say why it should or should not apply. And it feels like it should apply. So I'll update that. But I think what I'm waiting for mainly is from at least Janet or Ken to look at the choices that I have put forward and like suggest which ones make most sense and why, or any other suggestions you guys have.
Okay, I mean, I've looked it over. So first thing to me is we should get it probably, there are a couple things here. Did we get anything merged for this at all yet?
Yes, it is merged as provisional right now. I'm trying to get it.
Okay. So you're trying to get it to implementable.
Yes.
Okay. So really what you want to do is have a discussion about which method of the 4 we should implement.
Right.
All right, let me go back to So, I mean, the one thing is this, right? Like, so we have burstable, right? And burstable kind of indicates that we don't care about order. So if I was going to do, like for 4, introduce a field and rolling update, I don't think we ever really need to do that. Like if you have a burstable stateful set that pretty much says I probably don't care about ordering because I'm willing to start them up and tear them down all at the same time. So to me, that would be the field that burstable in conjunction with a max unavailable other than something that's the default would indicate that you're willing to roll fast and you don't care about order. If we can get that, I think that would be valuable. So even though 3 is the most complicated, right? Like that's for the person who cares about ordering. So like I look at it as if you're going to do max unavailable. Did you have some, Mike, were you trying to say something?
Sorry, I was saying that I didn't follow your comment because I don't see how. So currently stateful set doesn't have burstable, right? It only has rolling update. The only way burstable works is for scale up and tear down, which doesn't apply to rolling updates, right?
It works for rollout, tear down, scale up, scale down. The only thing it doesn't work for is rolling update. Right? So because there was no max unavailable. So if you specify max unavailable in conjunction with burstable, to me, that would be semantics that say, okay, I really don't care about ordering.
Right.
But I want to be able to, kill more than one at once. And if you specify not burstable, if you specify it as false, then you probably actually really care about ordering, which means 3 would be more valuable to you, even though it's complicated.
Right. So I guess you're also saying that PMP should apply to max unavailable.
I think like the nicest implementation for the end user would look something like that. But I think we'd have to go back and take a look at the feasibility of actually providing those guarantees in the presence of failures, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for 3, I mean, like, once you start killing more than one at once, and some of this is like, to say like pods won't start terminating, you can't actually say that because things like eviction could start them terminating. It's all about what you try to preserve, right? So like for 3, if you kill a pod or if a pod is killed and you have to replace it, the question is which pod do you try to replace? And at which version do you try to replace it, right? Do you make sure before you kill any more pods that you replace the pod at the correct version? That's the best kind of semantic that you can actually give. So I mean, well, I'll go through and give my thoughts and give a more formal review. But for some immediate feedback, like I would be leaning towards if we can get a combination of 3 and 4 that's compatible with burstable, I think that would be the most valuable thing to end users.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I think.
I mean, go ahead.
No, I think I agree. I mean, like what we would want is like the newest implementation, and we can definitely get feedback from the community. And yeah, I don't want to like put super complicated stuff right away. So I think I'm with you on that. And if we can, yeah, like why don't you put your thoughts there? And like, does that make sense? Like, did I capture the last part correctly? Right, when you said make burstable work with max unavailable, I think what you're saying is make pod management's policy parallel work with max unavailable.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, they work with PMP.
Okay, got it.
I mean, that's the way I would think it would be the slickest feature we could implement. I mean, like I could also give you some feedback about maybe what ordering you could do it in order to get an MVP out the door as soon as possible, and then add more complicated logic as you get feedback from users. Because I mean, it could be that people who are looking, like my general intuition that I'd like evidence on before like swearing to is that if you have something that requires a lot of ordering from stateful set in order to orchestrate it, then more likely than not, speeding it up isn't your primary concern, right? If you have something that's very tolerant to disruptions, where you're able to like knock 2 or 3 of them over at the same time, and it's able to either form a quorum or do leader election or whatever it needs to do to make a consistent distributed system, after you've knocked them over and after you've knocked multiple of them over, it may be that the ordering guarantees you don't care as much about.
Yeah, I think I'm fine. Yeah.
I mean, I tend to try to think of it in terms of actual systems. Like, so for pod management policy parallel, that was made for systems like Zookeeper, etcd, things where you have like effectively stable leader election via stable membership. You can start them up in any order and they'll figure it out for you, right? But for systems like that, this isn't a very valuable feature because generally you only run 5 of them to tolerate 1 planned and 1 unplanned disruption. For something like Cassandra, where it's non-uniformly replicated, doing it faster might not help you very much because you have to be aware of the replication factor of the individual column families, right? Like you can't, it's not easy to ascertain which 2 or 3 I can knock over. And the 2 or 3 that you can knock over may not have anything to do with the ordinal ordering of the stateful set. For things that are uniformly replicated, like if you have a MySQL database or a MongoDB database or a single sharded MongoDB database, or Redis that's a single shard of replicas, you can probably move faster if you can tolerate the disruption, but then the question becomes, why are you replicating it if you can tolerate that much disruption? Like, if you're sharding it out for read fan out, you probably don't want to move any faster. If you're sharding it out for durability, like basically I need more replicas because the underlying storage is unreliable, so I need to spread it across failure domains, you probably don't want to knock them down any faster. So like for stream processors, I could see something like this being valuable. But yeah, I mean, like starting with the use cases of why we want to move fast would probably inform the decision about which should be implemented first and what the priority should be.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I think, so right now I'm driving, but can you put down your comments on the doc and then
yeah, for sure.
I'll update it with PMP stuff and the Nave implementation. And then, yeah, I mean, if we can make a decision in the next couple weeks, I think that will help.
I don't see why not.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'll follow up and we'll talk offline later. And anyone else who's got feedback on this should also hop in. We work better with more comments, not less, in my opinion.
Yeah, that will be helpful. And Ken, I'll ping you offline on Slack as well. Thanks.
No problem.
All right, thank you. The last item we have here for discussion topic, and I'm not sure who added it, is a bug scrub.
Well, before I went out on my paternity leave, we had talked about doing more triaging as a SIG. We don't have to do it. We can also give people 20 minutes back, but if people are interested, we were going to spend some time doing some triage on open issues and bugs.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Okay. Where is it?
Trying to share.
Trying to share screen. Zoom opens so many windows. I got it. Just trying to find the right window. Okay. Can people see the open issue screen?
Yeah.
Okay, Demon Skit needs more rolling update strategy.
Need more. Yeah.
So this is an actual open cap. And they're interesting. Okay, so SIG apps with no one assigned.
So pause is like the deployment pause, I assume. I think someone told me about this proposal on Slack.
Okay, well, you've been added as a reviewer. There's not a lot here yet. Okay, do you want to get added as a...
Yeah.
So we'll take a look and see if this one runs deeper. Okay. This is probably not us. So this person wants to mount a config map as a JSON file. I mean, you can, I don't even know what this actually means.
In any case, I would assign it to Kubelet folks.
Yeah.
Which is the one actually doing the mounting.
Or API machinery. I mean, you would, like, it's going to affect, it would affect, so I guess SIG node probably owns the implementation for the downward API in terms of the injection for config map for sure. And they definitely own the polling. well, it's not pulling anymore, the watches and the kubelet implementation, but it would probably require some API changes as well.
Yeah, possibly.
But certainly agreed, not us. Not until it breaks, then it's our problem. Deployment delete history.
History.
Why don't they use audit?
Sounds like they want an audit log.
Yeah, but so it says right here, it seems like the case for audit. Would that help in your case? Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
does anyone say to not close this and point to audit logging? Does anyone think we should leave this open?
No.
Nope.
Okay. Because maybe we're not understanding what he's saying. One of the things, it's not always clear when people say they want something that they actually want what they say they want. Catchup concurrency policy to cron job. That's interesting. Okay. What do people think? Like, my general thing here would be I ask for a cap. Like, it's not clear to me that we can do this.
I can see why to ask for it, so maybe that would be useful.
Yeah, but I see the use case exactly. Like, I don't think, unless anybody is feeling like, okay, I got this, I want to go implement it and drive it with a cap, I would say ask them to implement a cap to describe it.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to keep it as assigned to them?
I think it-
Okay. Hmm. I think this is not us.
Yeah, sounds like that by description.
Node team.
Yeah. Sorry, Don. Ooh. So you can actually do this depending on what they want to do. What? No. How detailed do we want to be about why we can't do that? So this guy wants to reference one API object from another API object. I mean, there's no consistent way to do this. Yeah, I'm trying, like, there are ways to do what he wants. I'm just trying to figure out how responsive we need to be in terms of saying, have you considered using host path volumes or using, you could even use like a local PVC with multiple mounts, assuming it was read, write, many, that would work. But there's so much wrong with like trying to do what this guy wants to do. It's kind of hard to here, I'll just assign it and I'll go deal with it. I'll take it.
It seems like it has a solution to it. You just want to less config.
Yeah. There's solutions, but the answer to this is really just going to be, we can't do this from an API level. What you're asking is not going to work. But here, I'd like to at least like to try to give him some pointers to things that will help him achieve his end goal, even though we're not going to implement this feature, I don't think.
Yeah, isn't this the kind of thing that should happen in a higher level abstraction, whether it's a Helm chart or you're using Customize or some higher level abstraction?
Yeah, I mean, but there's also storage. So like, there are problems with the way he wants to use storage primitives that affect the scheduler at a minimum. Right, because if I have a cron job that's referencing a deployment spec, I'm guessing his expectation is it would get co-scheduled with the deployment so that the pod of that cron job can actually access the storage, assuming that it's like, there's conceptually a lot that's going on here for what this person's asking. So like, I mean,
I don't think
there is SIGs though, mostly. Go ahead.
I don't think there is even a higher level primitive for this. From what I see, he's asking to reference a storage that's pod local to be shared between pods, which is crossing a security boundaries. It's crossing also the fact that temporary storage would be shared across pods, which are on different nodes possibly.
Yeah, I mean, like even this is assuming it can't work, and then like it's not even specifying specifically that we're dealing just with local storage. If you open this up in the API, you'd also have to support like PD with it as well. And like in theory, there isn't. You bring up a very good point about crossing security boundaries, but let's assuming that we even can set up RBAC in such a reasonable way that if a user wanted to do this, even though it's not super safe, we would let them. At a technical level, like at a storage primitive level, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. You can do the things he's talking about doing. That's probably not a good idea, but it is doable. It's just, I don't think we're going to add APIs to support it, which wouldn't be doable anyway, as far as I can tell.
Yep.
But I'll assign to myself and make a note to go back and give him some help.
And it is a pragmatic problem, right? You have an application that has some volumes attached and is doing things to it, and then you have a cron job that wants to come along and do things. Maybe you upload images with your through an app you have running in a deployment, and you've got a cron job that comes along and optimizes the images that haven't already been optimized so far, right? It only does it periodically. It's a dumb case, but you've got this kind of use case. So being able to access the same volumes there, but how you go about approaching it is where the devil's in the details.
Yeah. Okay, so this one, yeah.
Oh, it's just a test failure.
Yeah, but they're labeling it as priority critical. Oh, yeah, we saw this one before, I think. I think this is the thing we get where if you're...
Oh, it's about the...
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's the... It's running 114 test against the 116 master.
Hmm.
Oh,
Isn't that really what we should?
well, no, because like we don't actually support that upgrade path, right? Like,
Yeah, there is always just +1.
yeah, so like this is like, I mean, the test is invalid. Anybody want to assign it to just like keep an eye on it, or?
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I don't think there's any work here. Just especially Jordan's already looking at it. He already made the triage basically as like, hey, no, you guys are doing something. But like, if there's any support that we can give them, it would be good.
Yeah, someone just needs to make sure that we run from 115 instead of 114 here. I think.
Right. I don't actually think we have to do anything either. I think they'll do the update. I just, now that they've got it, but keeping an eye out for it to see if they need anything would be the cool thing to do. Container level termination grace period seconds. Interesting. I don't think this is us actually.
I suppose SIG Apps and signals.
I mean, you can keep us on it, but
Yeah, like it's not related to us really.
I mean, I don't mind leaving the SIG apps label over on it if it's interesting to the SIG. I'm not assigning it to unless anybody wants the assignment. Okay, I'll leave it alone for now. Let's move forward. This is interesting. What do they want? I'll take it. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing, but I'll go through it and try to figure it out. It is stateful set. Unless somebody else wants it.
CC me there as well, because I think I have a bug about a similar thing. At least there was pretty long host name that didn't fit in, as I recall.
daemon set one.
I was going to add, well, I'll CC you on it later
Oh.
as a
Sure.
correct you some. Oh, okay. 33 nodes and every node running a pod of Kubernetes proxy created by daemon set. And all the pod of Kubernetes proxy DS was running status. But when I describe the DS of Kubernetes proxy, the status is
So it's about documentation.
Anybody want to take a look deeper at this? Oh wait, Joseph already chimed in on this.
Yeah, just assign it to me.
Okay. Okay, it looks like we're running low on time, everybody. Anything, last minute things anybody wants to chime in?
Doesn't sound like it. Thanks for the bug scrub.
Okay. See everybody next week.
Have a wonderful week, y'all.